fan of this channel and the kind of stuff I talk about here, chances are you're also a fan of science fiction and stories set in the future. And in these imagined futures, there's a couple of different tropes that you see over and over again. One is the utopian Star Trek future, where we've moved past money and greed isn't a thing anymore. And then there's the dystopian futures, where we're all basically slaves to corporations that run the world. And obviously, the first one is the one that we all prefer and the one that we all want to go to sometime in the future. But when you start talking about getting rid of money, you get a lot of blank stares. I mean, that's just sci-fi nonsense. We can't actually do that, can we? I mean, can we?
Hi Joe, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I appreciate that you've taken the time to visit the concept of a resource-based economy. It's funny because right now I'm working on a response of sorts to an Isaac Arthur video, with whom you are in contact with, as I understand. To your question, in a word, yes, although this depends on whether the concept is effectively communicated and accepted by enough of the world's population at large to initiate such a change. Of course, this is a complex consideration, so we'll discuss that later. Excuse me, but I'm going to be skipping the portion of your video wherein you explore the life of Jacques Fresco and the origins of the Venus Project, as well as your segment on the design of the circular cities. Instead, I'll be focusing on some of the other substantive portions of your video.
So the argument that many people are going to make that, having all your needs met would cause people to just be louses and sit around and play video games and not contribute in any way, yeah, there are going to be some people that are going to do that, but it's also going to free up some people who don't have the ability to do that now to contribute to society in a way that they haven't ever been able to before. So it goes both ways.
I'd like to expand on your point here, Joe, if I may. The selfless contribution of knowledge and expertise toward technological services and luxuries is already happening. This is evidenced by the tens of billions of hours of donated time and energy into free open source software, and the emergence and growing popularity of the sharing economy, and a greater global activism against existential threats such as global warming, poverty, and war. While, as you said, it is true that some in a system which provided constant access to technology and essential services and resources would choose to not contribute in any way, this would not be an issue in a system which could easily provide for everyone even if half of the population thus did not contribute. Of course, there aren't that many lazy people out there, as we all know. This is evidenced simply by the fact that many of the naysayers of the resource-based economy argue that they wouldn't want to live in a world where nobody did anything. Proponents agree. If most of us already want to contribute and enjoy the brilliant potentials and wonders of existence, the notion that we'd become sedentary recluses in a more intrinsically nurturing and accessible environment seems a twisted application of logic. Another point is that the population in a resource-based economy, even if they had to do some work initially until full automation was achieved, would have to do vastly less work than what our species currently does. By eliminating redundant and unproductive jobs and scaling back the aggressive overconsumption seen in the current economic paradigm, it's possible that today the average person could work a mere 15 to 20-hour work week while suffering no loss of quality of life, besides access to trivial material luxuries.
Okay, so some of you are probably touching yourselves in the dirty place right now just hearing some of these ideas, and some of you are angrily banging out comments in all caps calling me a communist for acknowledging its existence. Well, I think you're both about to be shocked to hear me say that I think the Venus Project is an idea whose time will never come.
I disagree, of course, although I don't pretend to know it's absolutely going to happen. I'm positive you haven't heard that the Venus Project is launching a prototype in Brazil. Although the attempt is in its fledgling stages now, at least a proof of concept is in the wings.
Because while there are a lot of really great ideas around the Venus Project, I think it's built around a set of assumptions that I'm not 100% sure are true. The first assumption is that capitalism is fundamentally bad, it's corrupt, and has put too much power in the hands of too few people. And this is true, but maybe, and just go with me here, but maybe, despite all of its flaws, when you look at the big picture, capitalism's kind of working.
This hits on a particularly important point. There's an assumption that the Venus Project is seen in opposition to capitalism, where in actuality it recognizes that the paradigm is obsolete and insufficient. The Venus Project views capitalism as a stepping stone in our evolution, not as an enemy to fight in the trenches. Of course, the Venus Project's criticisms and harsh rhetoric against the structural violence generated by capitalism often occludes this more meaningful conversation.
World poverty rates have gone down, the number of war deaths has gone down, infant mortality rates have gone down, global life expectancy is rising, and the world literacy rate is steadily increasing.
This is an example of misattribution. Although capitalism is a paradigm which uses currency to facilitate production and distribution of resources, it's not required to perform these tasks. I mentioned in another of my videos that algorithms have been developed already that prove that production and distribution could be facilitated by other methods today. It wasn't capitalism which is responsible for these developments, but rather the emergence of technology and increasing levels of education, generally through access to this technology. Also, the poverty statistic is misleading. Although the World Bank has correctly claimed that we've reduced the number of people living on $1.25 a day by half since 30 years ago, the same number of people today live on $2 a day or less. That's still grinding poverty compared to what we could achieve today if we actually wanted to solve this issue. That's besides the fact that it's estimated that as little as $30 billion could resolve world hunger and malnourishment and prevent millions from starving to death every year. These resources are readily available. This is a drop in the bucket compared to the US military budget, for instance, yet there's no monetary incentive in fixing this problem. So millions continue to die of hunger and hunger-related diseases every year simply because the current paradigm isn't structured to directly address these inefficiencies.
Now, there are a lot of factors that go into those statistics, and you can't put all the credit on the shoulders of capitalism, but it is the predominant economic model in the world right now. Now, this doesn't mean that the negatives don't exist. They very much do. We are way too wasteful, we are too much in debt, and we make decisions based on a profit motive instead of what's good for people or what advances society forward. And we do still have the problem that I talked about in my previous video, the problem of what do we do when automation and technology gets rid of 30% of jobs out there, when 30% of our workforce can't get a job due to no fault of their own. That's still a problem we're going to have to contend with. Over the next several decades, capitalism is going to have to adjust to survive. In the stock market, when a stock gets too high and then comes back down, they call that a correction. I see a great correction coming for capitalism. I think capitalism 100 years from now is not going to look anything like capitalism today. So it may be that capitalism, if left to its own devices, will kind of become something like a resource-based economy, or at least take in some of the ideas from that. And by the way, it's not even about capitalism that much. Keep in mind, the Venus Project wants to get rid of monetary systems altogether, so capitalism, socialism, communism, and any other ism out there would go away under the Venus Project. And given the positive trajectories the world is going in right now, I'm not convinced that's the right idea.
Capitalism is a directionless tool. It is people that will solve these problems, and that's an important distinction to make. This hits on another important point. The Venus Project isn't just a solution to economic issues, but to cultural and social issues as well, and those need to be dealt with first. Ultimately, those in the resource-based economy movement hope to facilitate a cultural transition toward a sustainable global society through education and conversation. The argument against your point here is that ultimately, monetary systems will retard development toward sustainability and inhibit social progress. You're trying to distinguish capitalism from the profit motive, as if these two terms can be extricated. However, economic paradigms without the profit motive are often called something else, socialism. This is exactly how the USSR operated for decades, with the use of currency in a low or no profit market.
And the last thing that makes me a little bit cynical about this is that the whole circular city idea is something that's actually been around for a really long time. And it's never worked. There's a school of thought that a city is an evolving, living thing that springs forth from a place and from a history. And the reason these hyper-planned communities don't exactly work out is because they don't feel like a city. They feel engineered, manufactured, even authoritarian.
In the comment section below your video, a user recognized that the technology simply didn't exist for previous circular city attempts, and that this technology does exist today. But you did make a good point. The Venus Project circular city does seem inorganic. However, one needs to recognize that Fresco's models were just that, models. They weren't finalized designs, and in fact he often said he didn't expect his models to look anything like what would eventually be built. A circular city doesn't need to look so aesthetically specific, and I doubt they would.
Now, this might be a good time for me to step back and say, for the record, I, for one, would love to see the Venus Project come to life. I know I'm doing a lot of naysaying here, but I think everything should be at least tried, and I think there's a lot of really good ideas that could be implemented there. I think we have entered this era of abundance where we have the technology to make these things possible. Intelligent resource management, automation of utilities that can provide for our basic needs with less waste. We just need our mindsets to catch up with the technology.
Thanks, Joe. I think you had many very insightful thoughts, and I appreciate your optimism and entirely agree with this final point. Again, I encourage you to look into the Brazil Project, but also to explore other resources such as the Zeitgeist Movement and the Auravana Project to glean a much more in-depth understanding of the goals and activities of the resource-based economy movement as a whole. Have a great day. I look forward to your next video.